Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pencil versus Pixel. I'm your host, Caesar, and I'm very excited to introduce my guest today, January 1st. Very excited, Mike Rohde. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey Caesar, how you doing, man? This is great.
Mike's a designer, an illustrator, a sketchnoter, and a writer. He's really well known for his work in the books The $100 Startup, Rework, and Remote. But not only that, he also has his own book, the Sketchnote Handbook, which I have right here. Which brings me to something really special we're going to do today, Mike and I. We are going to give away one free Sketchnote Handbook to a lucky listener or a lucky viewer of Pencil versus Pixel. But please stick around to the very end for the details.
Yeah, we're gonna do it.
Very excited about this. So, Mike, before we continue, pencil or pixel?
I would say 60% pencil, 40% pixel. Can I do that?
Yeah, oh, definitely.
So I've been using a pencil for my whole life, and I love pencils. Actually, I'm in love with this retro 1951 stealth black pencil. It's amazing. It's got really thick lead. So I do a ton of sketching for client work. So I'm always sketching and concepting, and then I'll scan that stuff in. So at that point, it becomes pixel, right? When I do illustration, I do all that by inking on paper. I scan it in, and then I'll work with it in Photoshop. I'll tweak it. Sometimes I'll vectorize it. So eventually, all my sketches will become pixelized. So that's why I say 60-40, since 60% is the concepting and drawing, and then 40% is the production.
Mike, I've given a little bit of background about what you do, but let's get to know you a little bit better. Go ahead and give us an overview of what you do.
Well, I'm partially an illustrator, as we talked about. So illustrating books like Rework and Remote and $100 Startup and others. I also am an author, so I wrote the Sketchnote Handbook and illustrated that as well. But some people may not know that I'm actually a user experience and user interface designer as well. So a portion of my day, I'm working for a company called Gamal Research and Design. We do user-centered design, which means we do lots of research with actual users using actual products or proposed products. We observe what they do, we note it down, we look for patterns and trends, and then we produce reports that we, the designers, use to build the wireframes, to do the visuals. And of course, we've always got branding constraints, like when you need this logo, you need these colors, and technical constraints as well, what platform, that kind of stuff. So we work within that realm to produce really nice user interfaces for users to use so that it's good for them. We actually look for the things that they get hung up on and try and fix those ahead of time. Or if there's things that they need, we sort of observe like, hey, I wish I would have this, or I wish this worked this way. And we use that to improve any interfaces. And I focus a lot more on the visual side of it. So I've got a long experience as a graphic designer and web designer. And so I do a lot of emphasis on icon design, on the visual design, although I do love wireframing and structure and that kind of stuff. So I'm sort of a hybrid in a sense of a user experience and user interface in that job.
Very cool. Did you always want to be a designer?
You know, that's a funny story. Actually, I always drew when I was a kid. I made my own comic books. I did drawing all the time. I drew cars. It was just something I did. I never thought about it as being a profession. So when I got into high school, I wanted to take drawing, but we had moved to a new city, to Milwaukee, where I live. And as it turned out, I couldn't get into art classes. I had to take printing classes. So I ended up starting as a technical kid in printing classes, even though I could draw. But I still had this hybrid nature. I was always drawing anyway. I ended up working at the newspaper doing cartooning and things like that. But I also had my other foot in this technical area, which at the time was printing. So I got really good at the technical while still maintaining the creative part. And I think that, as I look back, has sort of always been a part of my life, the mix of creative and technical. So I'm very much into, devices, mobile devices, and the technical side of those, web design and interaction design, the technical, but also the visual part and the creative side. So it's been a blend. So actually, as it turned out through the path of my life, being a printing student, I got into my career in college, and there was a moment where I was able to switch professions or switch majors, I guess in that case, and move over to design and graduated as a design student before I left school.
Very cool. Very cool. So tell us about your work with the $100 Startup and books with Jason Fried and David. How did that go about? Did they find your work at other places, or Was there interaction in another way with between you and them?
It all began actually because of sketchnoting. So I started doing the sketchnoting thing, which I discovered about 6 years ago, because I was so frustrated with my old notes, which were these huge books of pencil notes, no drawings, like all text. I always thought I would go back and draw all this meaning and analyze them. I never did. So I made the switch in early 2007 to use a little book, a pen, and try and capture these ideas that were happening and I was thinking of in my head visually on in this little book. Because the book was small, I couldn't write everything I wanted. Because I was using a pen, if I made a mistake, I'd either work with it or I'd be very deliberate. And the combination of those two things helped push me to a place where I was being more aware of what was happening in the moment and then capture the things that were resonating. So it became much more compact, much more fun to do because I was drawing like I always had in the past. And it was fun to share so other people could see it and get a gist of what I was doing. So because I did that, that offered the opportunity to go to some events. One of the early events I went to was a conference that 37 Signals and Kudal Partners put on called the Seed Conference. So I went to that on my own. I sketchnoted it, and those guys noticed it. So that's how I got on the radar at 37 Signals.
You work as a freelancer.
Part of the time, yeah. So it's kind of a blend for me. The company I work for, I mentioned Gamal. They have a unique model. It's not like employees. We're employees, and we get the benefits of health, and we have a 401k type thing for small businesses. So from that perspective, it's really nice. But they don't work on a salary basis. That's the difference. So instead of paying me a monthly salary, they pay me a portion of the projects that I work on. So they take a portion, I take a portion. If there's more than one person on the project, we split that portion based on our workloads and what we did. And what's the beauty of that is it frees me to do other things like write books and illustrate books and do illustrations or travel or whatever I like with this other time that I have. It's really up to me. It's kind of a burden, more of a burden on me to make sure I get everything done. But I really love it. It's a really good fit for me in my life right now.
How do you pick up illustration work nowadays? Does it sort of come to you? Do people come to you, or do you go out and seek this sort of?
At this point, it sort of comes to me. There was a point in my career where I had to go seeking work of all kinds, icons, logos, and stuff. So I know what that's like. But in this case, the work really comes to me, especially because of rework and remote. And as I'm building this portfolio of book illustrations, those kind of projects sort of find me. Sketchnoting gigs find me as well. Now that I've written the book, people find out that I've done that and they want to have me do that for their event. Or now I'm moving into the space of doing more teaching. That's really exciting for me. I've got actually my Sketchnote workshop T-shirt. We did a pilot of this about a month ago with 8 friends, and we tested out our curriculum and tried all kinds of stuff in a cool space. And we found it was really effective. And so we're moving forward with offering these workshops around the country. So that's another thing that it frees me up to do, to travel to these things and to teach. And that's really exciting. Teaching other people how to do this one-on-one or in small groups is really fun. I am a family man, in case you were wondering. I got 3 kids, as well as Landon. I've got a 4-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son, and they're all great.
Let's talk a little bit about how you started illustrating for the books that Chris Gilbo and the guys from 37 Signals created. How did it all start? Did they approach you? You approached them? Did you meet somewhere? How did that go about?
Well, it actually started out because I started sketchnoting around the same time as I went to a 37 Signals event. In fact, I think it was maybe the second sketchnoting experiment that I did. I thought of it as an experiment at the time because the old notes I took were in these giant books with pencil. I captured every detail. I made the assumption that I would go back and pull the relevant information out, which I never did. I finally got so frustrated at the end of 2006 that in 2007, I started carrying around a small pocket notebook and a pen. And the reason I did that, as a designer, we often put limitations on ourselves to force our creativity to come out. So that was sort of my reasoning there, was to use a small book. I literally couldn't capture the amount of data I normally would. I used a pen, so I couldn't, I had to be very deliberate. And if I made mistakes, I had to make something of them or be okay with them. And the combination of the small book and the pen led me to the third thing, which is really being present in the moment, listening for things that were relevant to me that I could actually act on and do something about, and then use my drawing skills and my visual skills to capture those in notes with drawings and lettering. I love lettering and typography, so that was always a part of the sketch notes that I called them. And because I did that at a 37 Signals and Kudal Partners event, they became aware of me. We started talking. I did another event for them later as their official sketchnoter. And then eventually, Jason Fried came to Milwaukee and spoke, and I went and saw him in person. That was when I first actually got a chance to talk with him for a little bit. And he mentioned that he had some work that he wanted me to help on. We did a small project together. I did some sketching, and then when the time came for them to illustrate the book, they immediately thought of me. So really, it was sort of a long-term process of sort of being there in the beginning and making awareness, and then continuing to contact. I think for the second conference where I was the official sketchnoter, I think I actually reached out to them and said, "Hey, look, I'd love to come to C3. I see you've got some cool people. How about making me the official sketchnoter and bringing me out there?" And they liked the idea and brought me out. So it's kind of a combination of them reaching out and noticing me, and me being proactive and reaching out to them, and sort of this, a communication over time. And that's what led to, Jason emailing me and say, "Hey, you want to illustrate our book?" And I said, "Yeah." So that's where it started. And all the other books sort of came from Rework. So Rework was the first one. I think it's, books have done illustrations in them. I think that was one of the first in an essay form. I think they had 88 essays. Each essay had an illustration that it wasn't just with it, but it actually tried to emphasize and amplify the message. So, and it didn't try to take away from the message. We worked really hard together to think about, what does this essay mean? How do we represent this? Maybe in the same terms that were used in the essay, maybe in different ways that related to it, to get you thinking about how do you think about this idea. So it was one of the first, I think, business books to do that, where it was really emphasizing visual thinking and visual representation of ideas along with the text. So it got you thinking visually as well as reading the text, and the two sort of become intertwined and bound together. And I think that's really attractive to authors, to be able to represent their ideas. That led to Chris Gillibo reaching out to me and hiring me to do his book. And then the remote book just came out this last year. The 37 Signals guys came back to me again and said, "Hey, we love what you did in Rework. Can you do remote with us?" And I said, "Sure." And so we worked again together with that. So, and it's just sort of gone from there. The work just sort of flows in on its own. Customers just sort of find me, and then the problem now is less me finding work and more like deciding which projects fit me and which ones I want to do, which is a great place to be.
Definitely. Let's go back to how you work with the guys. So they probably sent you
kind of a brief or something.
Yeah. Throughout that process, did you go back and forth a lot and you showed them something and said, "Hey, this is what I have"? And
yeah, that's a great question. I've built a process over time with that integrates sort of getting a brief, whatever that, in some cases that's a client giving me a brief, like, here's the requirements of the job. In the case of a book, it's the manuscript. I mean, that is the book, right? So I would get these really early copies of the manuscript, often which weren't finished, but they had the general ideas. And so I could get a sense of, like, what is ahead of me and how do I need to represent this. So I would actually read the whole manuscript and understand what their message was overall, and then go essay by essay in that case and understand what each concept was. With 37 Signals and many of the other clients, they often had ideas for certain chapters, like, "Hey, we really like this idea for this chapter. Does that sound good?" And we would work together that way. But then there was a big chunk of them. They said, "We have no clue how to represent these visually. You need to help us." And then I would propose stuff. So it was really a collaboration in that case. My process has always included sketches. So my process is to, we talked about getting a brief, whether it's a manuscript or text. Then I'll use pencil sketching to just capture ideas. Sometimes it's multiple ideas. Then I scan those in. We use Basecamp, obviously, because they develop Basecamp, but I use that with almost all my clients, so that we can have commentary going on. They can leave messages and so forth. So we did that. I would put up my sketches, usually in batches. I tend to work in batches, put them up, another batch, put them up, rather than like trying to do them all at once, because then it's just too much. So I would do batches of sketches, put them up, and put numbers on them so we could reference them. And then in the text area next to where the image was, I would actually put the numbers in and describe each idea, why I liked it, where maybe a problem was, and then they would bounce back with feedback. And together we would sort of work through these batches until we got solutions that made sense. So we might in some cases, maybe I'd nail it on the first try. That was more of a rare thing. Usually we would have like 2 rounds. So they would give feedback. "Oh, that's a great idea." I would change something up and then post up another batch of sketches with revised sketches. Eventually, we'd come to a consensus, hey, this is good. And eventually, after going through all these batches, we had all 88 sketches approved. So then that's kind of nice because then I know kind of where I'm going. Then I can go away and do batches again, but maybe larger batches of inking. So I would get a Moleskine sketchbook, a large size. Sometimes I would pencil out stuff and figure out how things were going to go. And then I would ink stuff. And the interesting thing about my process is I'll often ink little tidbits and pieces. And I don't worry about making like the illustration exactly as you see it in the book, because I know that there's probably changes coming from either 37 Signals or the customer or even me. And if I get too precious about my illustration being perfect and then I've got to change it, then it's a big hassle. So being a production artist in print design for a long time, I thought of it from that perspective. How would I do this if I was doing it for print production, which a book eventually is, right?
Right.
So I approached it, hey, why don't I just do elements? I'll do pieces. Sometimes they're very complex pieces. I'll scan those in, I'll clean them up in Photoshop, and then piece them together in Photoshop using layers. I mean, that's the tool that I use every day as a UI designer. Why not leverage the process that I already use to make this work? So what I would do is ink the pieces based on the approved sketches. I would scan them in, and then in Photoshop, I got really good at like using layers and copying and pasting and duplicating and even sometimes drawing in the app to fill in dark spaces or to tweak things or clean things up until I would keep iterating till I got the final piece. And then I would post that up for review. I would always have the Photoshop master in case there's, hey, we want to move that hand over here, or this type is wrong, or I just knew that stuff was going to come. In the end, on that book, there were only a few minor changes because we were so collaborative through the process that it worked out really well. And it gave me the ability to make tweaks along the way as needed. So that's sort of the general process. I would then deliver like high-res files to the publisher. We use Dropbox to share files so they could grab them as they needed them. Because, I was working in batches and we were running behind the clock. So they would grab the finished ones and just start placing them in the book in whatever tool they use, probably InDesign.
So this is a perfect example. It's a perfect example of what they talk about in remote. I mean, this is perfect. You're using Basecamp, using Dropbox, going back and forth. I mean, it makes everything so much faster. How long does it take for someone for an illustrator to? How long did it take you? All three of you, right? Was it just you, David, and Jason?
Yeah, in the first book on rework, it was primarily Jason. Although I know that they on their own worked together to solve and write the stuff. I think it was kind of nice because Jason realized it was great to have one person to make a decision. So I just mainly worked with Jason. The other guys would have feedback from time to time, but he sort of was the representative for 37 Signals. So as I would come back, if he had changes or any of the other people, it would funnel through him, which was really nice because it was pretty unified and consistent that way. And we would go back and forth. I think we did like one call when I called him to talk about the project, and maybe one call later on. The rest of it was all done with the tools that we had, Basecamp and posting stuff up, and maybe the occasional email with Crown, the publisher, who wasn't on the Basecamp project. So we did pretty much everything remotely. Which is interesting, for their latest book, which talks all about remote work. And the other side of it is part of my career was about 10 years doing remote work from my apartment with a company in Europe. So I had lots of experience working remotely. I think that really helped me in my writing skills. I was also writing a newsletter at the time and then switched over to blogging. So I did lots of writing, and I think that really helped me to be able to capture my ideas in writing and explain them in that kind of case where you're putting an image and text together that avoids having to do lots of phone calls. And if you need the phone call, you can do it. But that was pretty much how the process went. It was really similar on remote too. In that case, David was the lead. I'm not sure if he was just chosen as the lead or if he was the one that had the idea for the book. Regardless, they were both involved. I talked to Jason and David, but primarily it was David who was making the final decisions. And again, it was really good because you had one person you're talking to. It had a very consistent vision from illustration to illustration because there was one person making the decision and seeing the consistency. And I'm sure, I know that they were posting it on Basecamp and tons of people were seeing that work. Even people outside of 37 Signals were in that private Basecamp to see and sort of vet ideas that they had. So it was really interesting to see that process work again. And I think it just proves that for a lot of cases, remote work can work really well.
Mike, let's talk a little bit about how you got started in design. Did you always want to be a designer, or was it something that evolved over time?
It's kind of a combination of both, actually. I started out always having been an artist or someone who drew. I guess I didn't know if I considered myself an artist as a kid, but I always drew. It was part of my life. I made things a lot. So I was always making comic books and newspapers and drawing cars. For a time when I was young, I had a poster shop in our apartment in Chicago in the basement. I had these windows in my room, and I would do these posters of like hot rod cars and stuff, and put them up and sell them for a nickel. So that was sort of part of my life as a little kid. And I did art classes in school and stuff. But what the interesting thing was when we moved from Chicago to Milwaukee, because I moved in the middle of the semester, there were no art classes that I could take. So I switched into printing at the time, which turned out to be a great advantage for me as a print designer in the day. Um, so at the time, I was bummed out because I wasn't in art class, and I guess high school kids are all taking art class because it's an easy credit, right? So um, I ended up being a print student. I did work for a time, like I would go to school in the morning, and then work at a print shop in the afternoons. So I got some real good hands-on experience doing print production, which came in really handy when I went to college. I actually went to college as a printing student, and a fellow design student, we did crossover work. So as printing students, we would take design students take printing. And in one of those classes, I was with a design student. She was saying, "What are you doing in printing? You should be a designer," because I was showing her some of my work. And that was sort of the impetus for me switching majors and becoming a design student. And then when I graduated, I had a really deep knowledge of printing and why things worked. And so that made me a much better print designer for 10 years coming out of college, because I knew how printing worked. I'd go on press checks, and I knew how to talk to the pressman, and I understood what was going on and little tricks and how to do things. So I think it's kind of a combination. Like I sort of had the skills, but I didn't understand as a little kid, like you could be an artist for money. I just thought you were a painter, a hungry painter eating ramen noodles or something. And if you told me asked me what illustration was when I was 8 or 10, I probably wouldn't even know what that word was, right? I didn't understand that concept yet. So it's really funny that now later in my life, I'm doing all these things that I thought were cool, but I didn't have names for them. And now I get to do those. And in one case, sketchnoting, I get to create a name and describe it for other people. So that's really fun.
Did you have any careers previously before sketchnoting or illustrating, designing?
That's pretty much been my career through most of my life. I did have a paper route. I worked at Burger King for a while. That sort of redirected me in understanding that I didn't want to work in fast food or retail. But it was a good experience to understand how people in those situations work, and I learned lots of lessons. So mainly it's been, after college, it's been as a designer, as a print designer, then as a web designer, and now as more of a user interface, user experience designer, and illustrator and sketchnoter and teacher. So an author, I guess. So I keep adding up my job titles over time.
Awesome. What do you like best?
Well, that's really hard. I'm the kind of person that likes variety. When I first came out of college, the design firm I was at was great because every day we would have different stuff to do. We did logo design, we did brochures, we did packaging, we did signage, we did annual reports. Like, you're always doing different stuff. So you had a variety, I think, and that sort of set my ideal of what a designer was to have variety and be able to be flexible and do lots of things. So I kind of have built my life around doing a variety of things. So maybe it's sketchnoting and an event. Then maybe the next day I'm teaching, a workshop or speaking. And the next day I'm doing illustrations for a book. And then the next day I'm working on a user interface for an application, maybe for a mobile device. So there's all these different inputs. And what I find is I learn from each one and I apply those ideas to the other ones. And that's what kind of makes it fun, is sort of exploring all these different ways of expressing what I'm interested in.
Yeah, you also created a font, right? I mean, that's another thing that you have on your list of things on the list of things you do.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that I met Delv Witherington, who's my partner on that font project, who he worked for the big type houses, so he knows like technically how to do this stuff. He's really really good at it. Knows how to kern. He knows how all the tools. Like that's where he loves to be. And through a mutual friend, we got connected, and it was a perfect fit because I could focus on the drawing, and then he really enjoyed the challenge of trying to capture the ink. How can he redraw this? So I drew out all these letter forms, and he traced them
Wow.
meticulously by hand to try and capture the feeling of ink on paper. And he had a blast doing it, and I had a blast doing the drawing. And we were on another podcast, and someone asked, "Was it hard?" And we're like, "No, it was kind of fun. Like we thought, each of us thought we had the easy part because that's where our expertise was." And that was a lesson I learned from rework. Rework, it talks about reusing your waste products, right? So to do the sketchnote handbook, I needed a typeface because I knew if I hand wrote the whole book, inevitably there were going to be typos and changes, and whole paragraphs would have to change. And like, man, am I going to sit here and rewrite this whole paragraph or all these pieces? And how do you manage that? It just like made complete sense that I should make a typeface to do this. And that's when I reached out through a friend and met Delve. We produced the font really to do the book, but all along we knew this could be a really great product that we could sell, and we could both benefit from our skills. So that's what we did, and it's doing really well. People seem to really enjoy it, and we plan on continuing to extend it, um, adding to the dingbats and adding more languages. Quite a few languages now. We plan on doing more languages and releasing those as well for people that want them. So I think there's lots of cool things, and I mean there could even be more fonts in the future that I generate and we add to the family. So yeah, it's interesting this as you're doing projects to let those projects lead you to new ideas and being open to them. That's what I feel like has helped me a lot is when a challenge comes, like I could have looked at like doing a book being a pain in the butt, right? Like I got to rewrite all this stuff. And if I hadn't made the jump to like doing a font, that wouldn't have opened the opportunity to sell it, right? So every problem sort of is hiding an opportunity in some cases. So that's really good to remember.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Mike, how can a designer or a creative be more proactive about putting themselves and putting their work out there? What can they do?
The thing that's benefited me most is taking a long-term view of making friends and connections. I love what my friend Jay Finelli, who was on a couple episodes back, I sort of took this quote away. It was, do good work, be humble, and make friends. And I think that in that statement sort of captures the sense of things that we can do. So you got to do good work no matter what. If people don't know who you are, you still have to do good work. And then you have to be humble about it. So when you suddenly take off, hopefully, you remember where you came from and you just realize, hey, look, this is just design, and I keep it in perspective. And then finally make good friends. It's I've found the most satisfaction out of making friends, just because it's fun to do, because I like people. And then eventually it turns out that they've got a project that it's perfect for both of us to work on. Those are the best. I mentioned Delve Witherington was a common friend. That turned out really well. I've met the guys at United Pixel Workers, and we've talked about doing a T-shirt. So I think we're probably going to do something like that this year. 37 Signals, Chris Gillibo, like all these are because I was consistently going out and being and sharing. I think the other thing that I've learned is the way that I've used Twitter has been good. So I try to interact with people. A lot of people will hammer the same marketing message over and over again. I just, I don't buy that. I just did a giveaway for the first birthday of the handbook, and I tweeted it once a day. If somebody else would tweet it, maybe I would retweet it, but it was really minimal. I guess if a social media expert, looked at my campaign, they'd think it was a failure, because I didn't hammer everybody 20 times a day. But, that's not really what my goal was. My goal was to have something for people who are paying attention to have an opportunity to get in on, and then having discussions with them. So if they have questions, I'm answering questions. I have searches running for my book or terms that I'm interested in. So if I see someone like make a comment about my book and they don't mention me, I go find them and I I'll comment back to them like, hey, thanks for mentioning the book, or answer the questions. So I'm pretty proactive about using that medium, Twitter, in my case, as a way that I can reach out to people and make friends. And on more than one occasion, when I've been in cities, I'll say, like in Portland a little while ago, I just said, hey, I've got a free night, who wants to do something. And some friends of mine happened to see that, and we got together and had a really great dinner and some dessert afterwards over on Alberta Street. And I could have never planned that. There's no way that could have happened except that I built this um, trust, I guess, or reputation. Maybe that's the right word. Over time, that I'm someone who shares a lot of stuff that I like. You can look at it or not, depending on what you'll do. If you ask me a question, I'll answer you. And I try and help people and try to be encouraging. So those are the things that have worked for me. So I think it's just this consistency and being out there and being, what you're doing. Like you said before we got on this call, that you just decided you wanted to do it. Nobody gave you permission. You took the permission. That's really what you have to do. Find that space and then just go for it. I think so many times when I take risks to do things I've never done before, that's where things go really well. I mean, they can go badly, of course, too. But in either case, I'm learning from them. We just launched a sketchnote workshop that we're going to do. And I could have certainly said, oh, that's too scary, like it's expensive. And what if it goes wrong? And what if people don't like me? Or what if I screw up? And all those thoughts went through my head, but I did it anyway. And so that gave me the opportunity to learn. And then, wow, cough up a lung here. And now we're in talks to do one in Atlanta. We just came through South by Southwest, and another one in Milwaukee. So I think that unless I took that risk, those opportunities would never happen. So I think being willing to take reasonable risks, don't go crazy and quit your job and with your 4 kids and your mortgage and your house payment. Do more, small risks, like maybe you'll take a project on and maybe you won't watch movies or TV at night for a month, or maybe you'll work late for a month to get that project out while you're still doing your daytime job, until you get to the point where, hey, look, this is taken off. Maybe now I'm in a position where I can let go of this other thing and move to the new thing. So it's sort of these measured, reasonable risks that won't kill you, but they're risky. Like they could go wrong. The project could go badly, or the client could, you picked the wrong client, they won't pay you, but you still had that experience of doing the work, and the confidence.
That's a great segue to my next question. Tell us about a time when you've experienced failure. What happened? What did you do about it? And how did you overcome it?
Well, that's really interesting. I had another friend who asked me similar questions about a year ago, and I have to think back to what those projects were. Oh, so a couple of years ago, one of my focuses was logo design. I really still love logo design. I don't do it as much now. So there was a time when I got really busy doing logo design. I was getting pretty good at it. A lot of software people were my clients, and the word got around. And I had a client come to me and hire me to do a logo. And at the time, I was incredibly busy. And what happened was I just got overloaded and lost track of this project. And the timeline slipped. And I was able to deliver the work, but it was late. And the second, so I was 2 logos together. The first one he liked, the second one he didn't like at all. And so the combination of not liking the work that I did, that I was delayed because I had let myself get overloaded. He actually fired me as a client, as a customer, as a designer, which had never happened before. It was really shocking to me. But in a way, it was the best thing that could have happened, because it made me aware, like, hey, you can't take too many projects. You got to limit, right? There's only so many you can do, and you can't. And I had to find that limit, I guess, the hard way. And so I learned from that to be more specific or selective about the work that I would do. And I was focusing a lot on prospecting new work, and I sort of neglected the work I'd already had in that was that had been paid for already. So that changed my mindset. Now, I'll do prospecting and I'll talk to people, but the work that's in is always higher priority than the work that might come in, because it might not come in at all, right? And if you're spending too much time there and you're putting lots of effort into trying to win clients, that means you're not spending time doing the work of the clients that already paid you. So that was a lesson that I learned from that as well. So, every time I've made mistakes, even if they're little small ones, I try and learn. That's something my dad always sort of built into us kids, that when you make a mistake, figure out what you did wrong and learn from it, because there's benefit there. If you just get bummed out and you try and avoid it, then you're not going to learn from that mistake and get better at it. So that's kind of the way I look at these. And I think that's maybe why, I'm typically not a very risky person. I've got a family and a mortgage and kids and, all that kind of stuff. So I can't do crazy stuff anymore. Not like a single person who can get a lot more flexibility. So I would say if you're a young designer with opportunity to do something, give it a try, because when you start getting more settled, it gets harder to do. It's not impossible to do it, but it's hard to do it. If you're single, if it's just you and your wife, or you and your husband, and you have the opportunity to go do something and try something out or make connections, go for it, because you never know where it might lead. Maybe it's going to a conference that you're afraid to, or maybe it's a little more costly than you want, or maybe it's working remotely in another city, or whatever it is. Time
maybe
to try that
move
stuff
cross country.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like what you guys are doing. I look back to when I was first taking the job as a remote worker. So I'd worked 10 years in a print design firm in my hometown, very stable, very reliable, and all that kind of stuff. And I met a guy who was in Europe. He's an American in Europe, and he wanted to hire me for his company. And it was a little bit risky, I mean, I didn't know where the web was going to go at the time. It was still sort of a novelty, but I was fascinated by it. I knew that there was a need for design in that space, but it was all raw and new. Nobody knew where it was going. So I thought, hey, this is an opportunity to get in at the beginning in the mid 90s on this web thing. I can always go back and be a print designer, right? Like, I've got 10 years of chops doing that. If this all fell apart, I could always go get another job doing what I was doing, or maybe even at the same place, But if I didn't take this web opportunity and working remotely and working with Europeans, I would probably regret it. So I took it. And at the time I was single. I was dating my future wife, but she was my girlfriend. I didn't have any mortgage. I didn't have any car payments. Like, it was all real low overhead. It was a great time to make that choice and take that chance, because then I ended up, going over to Europe a bunch of times. I met a bunch of friends. I got a much more European perspective on things, which I think is a real benefit, to understand, an international perspective about the world. And I would have never been able to do or see those things if I hadn't taken that risk. So I think, when you're young and you've got that opportunity, now's the time to do it, and just, be smart about it.
Very, very awesome. All right, guys. So we're now at the time where we will announce what you have to do to win yourself this copy of the Sketchnote Handbook by Mike Rohde. This is a very amazing book. It teaches you how to take your notes to another level. Go to the episode with Mike Rohde's interview. Scroll all the way to the bottom in the comment section and draw your interpretation of pencil versus pixel.
There you go.
It doesn't have to be anything specifically, just your interpretation of pencil versus pixel. It could be a cool little illustration, a sketch, whatever, and post it. Post it on the comment section and let us know, this is my interpretation of pencil versus pixel. It could be what you've learned here. It could be what you think, the first thing that comes to your mind when you think pencil versus pixel. Have at it. Just put your answer in the comment section. We're looking forward to it. Mike, what do you think?
Go for it. I can't wait to see what we have pop up in the comments. And then you're going to have to do some kind of random pick, or I don't know if you're going to do it on quality or what.
We'll figure it out. We'll just have you choose the winner.
Great, thanks.
I'm kidding. We'll figure it out. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope many, many people get tons of value from this. We'll catch you soon. Happy New Year, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye, Caesar.